Whether you are prepping for a meeting or maybe just naturally, insanely curious, we have something really incredible for you today.
We really do. It's a fascinating one.
Yeah, so imagine a country where almost 100% of the youth can read and write, like practically universal basic literacy.
Right.
By standard economic rules, that country should be strapping into a rocket ship. You have the ultimate foundational ingredient for modern growth.
You'd expect massive innovation.
Exactly. A fully literate upcoming generation. You light the fuse, and you expect to see this sustained, explosive growth. But the nation we're looking at today completely defies that logic.
It really does. It flips everything on its head.
Instead of a rocket ship, their economic trajectory looks like a malfunctioning roller coaster.
So if you are trying to understand how raw human potential actually translates, or, well, fails to translate into real-world wealth, you are in the exact right place. Welcome to this deep dive into our sources.
Yeah, and we are opening up a massive, complex stack of data today. I mean, we are looking at thousands of rows of records. Oh yeah, a ton of data.
We've got stuff from the World Bank, the Food and Agriculture Organization, global governance indicators, and international balance of payments tracking.
And where exactly are we pointing our lens today?
We're focusing on the southern African nation of Eswatini, which was formerly known as Swaziland.
Right.
And the mission for this deep dive is to isolate a really profound economic paradox that's just hidden inside these spreadsheets.
It's the growth paradox, right?
Exactly. We are looking at a system that has secured one of the greatest educational achievements in its entire region, yet they just cannot seem to find a baseline of economic stability.
And that is the core contradiction we need to solve today.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at the data on Eswatini's youth, so people between the ages of 15 and 24.
Mm-hmm.
The youth literacy rate is an astounding 99.7%.
Which is practically unheard of in that context.
It really is. I mean, it's a massive human capital reserve.
Mm-hmm.
Yet when you chart their gross domestic product growth over the last few decades, it swings wildly.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
You see periods of like 6.4% growth.
Right.
Right. But then it's followed by plunges, including a severe contraction down to negative 2.95% in 2020.
And then immediately snapping back up to 4.2%.
Right. So the central question driving our conversation today is, well, why hasn't this incredibly high-quality human capital translated into sustained, stable economic growth?
Well, to understand that paradox, we have to recognize that an economy isn't just, a collection of smart individuals.
Right, it's more than that.
It's an intricate piece of machinery. The data from Eswatini serves as this masterclass in how structural vulnerabilities, the hidden plumbing of a nation, basically, can completely derail raw potential.
The hidden plumbing, I like that.
Yeah, it demonstrates what happens when the surface-level metrics of human capability look fantastic, but the underlying systems required to actually convert that capability into industrial output are, well, fundamentally compromised.
Okay, so let's start by mapping out the macro picture.
Yeah.
If we look at the GDP trajectory from 1960 up to 2023.
Adjusting for a constant 2015 US dollars, of course.
Right. So we're looking at actual purchasing power and real value. There's an undeniable upward climb. The overall GDP grew from roughly $600 million back in 1960 to around $4 billion by 2023.
So wealth is technically being generated.
Technically, yes.
Yeah.
But that line is violently jagged.
It really is. It looks like a seismograph during an earthquake.
That's a great way to put it.
That constant spiking and crashing in the annual growth percentage, it indicates an economy lacking internal shock absorbers.
Like that severe hit in 2020 you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. That negative 2.95% drop, followed by the immediate rebound, shows an environment reacting purely to external stimuli. They aren't generating their own stable internal momentum.
Which brings us to the population itself. Because if the overall economy is a roller coaster, you would expect the demographics to stagnate, or maybe aging out.
But the demographic data shows the exact opposite.
Right. Eswatini is sitting on a massive youth storm.
Yeah, the population pyramid is actively transitioning in a way that most developing nations, honestly, they dream of.
Really? How so?
Well, the working age population, so those between 15 and 64 years old, has steadily climbed. Historically, it hovered around 47% of the total population, but today it's over 62%.
Meaning the dependency ratio is falling.
Exactly.
Every individual worker has fewer dependents, like fewer children and elderly people relying on their single income.
And that falling dependency ratio is the mechanical engine behind what economists call a demographic dividend.
A demographic dividend, that's what fueled the Asian tigers, right?
Spot on. It's the exact population transition that fueled the rapid industrialization of places like South Korea and Taiwan in the late 20th century.
So how does that mechanism actually work in theory?
It's straightforward, really. A massive influx of young labor enters the market. They produce more than they consume, which generates excess household income.
Okay, makes sense.
That income goes into banks as savings. The banks lend those savings to businesses, and businesses use that capital to build factories and infrastructure.
But wait, if they have that massive influx of working-age youth, and the overall GDP has technically grown over the decades, what is physically destabilizing the daily economy?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. If the labor supply is there, why isn't the Asian tiger mechanism engaging for Eswatini?
Because raw labor supply is merely the fuel. You still need an engine that can process that fuel without tearing itself apart.
So what's wrong with their engine?
To see that, we have to look at the structural tension between the two main sectors of Eswatini's economy, industry and agriculture.
Okay, let's look at industry first. When I was reviewing the World Bank national accounts data in our source stack, the numbers on manufacturing really stood out to me.
They're surprisingly high, aren't they?
Very. Manufacturing makes up between 30 to 35% of Eswatini's total GDP.
Yeah.
And in the context of the broader Southern African region, having a third of your economic output coming from manufacturing is incredibly high. That sounds like a rock-solid industrial base.
It is a substantial base, but it operates in a highly precarious position.
Precarious how?
Well, that 35% is almost entirely exposed to global trade winds. Eswatini's total trade volume relative to its GDP is consistently high,
Oh, I see.
which means the manufacturing sector is heavily reliant on importing raw materials, processing them, and then exporting the finished goods.
So they are deeply, deeply integrated into global supply chains.
Exactly.
But that means if global demand drops, or, if shipping logistics freeze up globally, that 35% of their GDP takes a direct, massive hit.
Right, because they don't have a massive internal consumer market to buy those manufactured goods if the export market dries up.
That's a terrifying vulnerability for your primary engine.
It is. Now, contrast that with the agricultural sector.
Let's do it. What's the data say?
Agriculture makes up less than 10% of Eswatini's GDP. It's a fraction of the economic output compared to manufacturing.
Okay, 35% versus less than 10%.
Yet the data reveals that agriculture is the primary source of the entire nation's extreme economic volatility.
Wait, how does a sector that produces less than a tenth of the nation's wealth hold the rest of the economy hostage? Doesn't seem to make sense.
It's all about employment and informal labor. Even though commercial agriculture produces a small slice of the official GDP, subsistence and small-scale farming employ a vast majority of the rural population.
Oh, wow. So it's about the sheer number of people dependent on it.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanics of the 2015 to 2016 drought. The climate data shows average annual precipitation dropping around the 788 millimeter mark.
And the economic fallout from that specific drop in rainfall was staggering. I remember seeing that.
It was brutal.
The agricultural value-added growth plummeted by negative 19%. Nearly a fifth of the sector's output just vanished.
Let's trace how that weather event cascades through the economy. When that drought hits, a rural family doesn't just lose their surplus crop.
Right.
They lose their entirely disposable income. If they have no surplus to sell, they stop buying manufactured goods like clothing, building materials, or basic consumer electronics.
And they stop paying for local transport and services, I imagine.
Exactly. So domestic consumption simply evaporates.
Completely evaporates. And when domestic consumption evaporates, the local businesses that service those rural communities start laying off workers.
The local transport networks stall. It ripples upward.
So you have a manufacturing base reliant on the unpredictable weather of global markets.
Right.
And an agricultural base reliant on the actual physical weather.
It is a dual trap. If the global market sneezes, the factories shut down. If it doesn't rain, the local economy starves.
Wow. But this brings us back to the human capital.
The paradox, right?
Exactly. If you have this hyperliterate youth population, this 99.7% literacy rate, why aren't they stepping in to solve this?
It's a fair question.
Why aren't they building, like, climate-resilient agricultural tech? or transitioning those factories into higher tech, less volatile industries?
That question requires us to look at the difference between the inputs of the education system and the actual outputs.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, the literacy achievement is phenomenal. It deserves immense credit. The data shows adult literacy around 80.4%, but youth literacy jumped to 99.7%.
That's a massive leap in one generation.
It gets better. Youth female literacy is 99.8%. They have effectively eradicated youth illiteracy and the gender gap in basic education in a single generation.
It's an incredible baseline. I mean,
Yeah.
truly. But the source material describes something called an education funnel. What is that?
The funnel visualizes the attrition rate of that human capital.
Attrition rate. Okay.
Yeah, so at the top of the funnel, primary school net enrollment is exceptional, sitting at roughly 95%. That is why almost everyone can read.
Right. They get them in the door early.
But as those children age into the secondary school system, the infrastructure and support networks fail them. By the time you reach junior high school, the completion rate drops to a mere 34%.
Wait. Only 34% of these kids are actually finishing junior high.
Just 34%.
It's like building a massive state-of-the-art highway that just suddenly turns into a dirt path halfway to the city. Or, to stick with our earlier analogy, it's like a manufacturing assembly line that is perfectly designed to put a state-of-the-art engine into a car chassis.
But it completely runs out of funding before it can install the wheels.
Yes, the engine is brilliant, but the car can't actually drive anywhere.
That analogy captures the economic reality perfectly. We have to distinguish between basic literacy and marketable technical skills.
Literacy isn't enough on its own.
Right. Being able to read a sentence and do basic arithmetic is a fundamental human right and a crucial foundation. But in a modern, globally integrated supply chain, basic literacy does not qualify you to walk onto a manufacturing floor and operate complex CNC machinery.
It doesn't qualify you to manage logistics software or engineer new irrigation systems.
Exactly. Without finishing secondary education, that 66% who drop out are walled off from the manufacturing sector that actually drives the GDP.
So what happens to them?
They have no choice but to fall back into the informal labor market or into that highly vulnerable, weather-dependent agricultural sector we just talked about.
Oh, man. But why is the dropout rate so catastrophic? I mean, are families pulling their kids out to work the farms out of desperation? Or is the school system simply not physically accessible in rural areas?
It's a combination of geographic isolation, the cost of transportation and uniforms, and the pressure to contribute to household survival.
Just grinding poverty.
Yes, but to truly understand the sheer weight pressing down on these families and the government's inability to fund those secondary schools, we have to look at the health shadow that has dominated Eswatini's recent history.
Yeah, the public health data in our sources is genuinely sobering.
Yeah.
It fundamentally alters how you view their economic baseline.
It does. In the early 2000s, Eswatini faced an existential demographic threat due to the HIV/AIDS epidemic.
Right.
The impact was so severe that the national life expectancy crashed to an astonishingly low 43 years.
43 years.
No.
I mean, the economic implications of that are profound.
Hmm.
You aren't just losing people, you're losing your most experienced prime-age workers.
Your veteran teachers, your mid-level managers.
Exactly. You cannot build complex industrial or educational systems when the people who are supposed to be running them are passing away before they hit middle age.
The loss of institutional memory and workforce continuity was absolutely devastating. However, the data also documents one of the most successful public health interventions in modern history.
The RT program.
Yes. Through a massive coordinated effort backed by international support, Eswatini scaled its antiretroviral therapy, or RT, coverage from a mere 3% of the infected population to over 90%.
Taking coverage from 3% to over 90% is a logistical marvel, especially in a country with a large rural population.
It really is, and the demographic result is clear. Life expectancy has rebounded from 43 years back up to 57 years. They stabilized the collapse. But, and this is crucial for the economy, this medical victory introduced a massive permanent structural weight on the government's fiscal expenditure.
Because managing a chronic illness on a national scale is incredibly expensive.
Exactly. Maintaining an RT program that covers over 90% of the infected population requires continuous, unbroken funding.
You can't just stop it.
No. You have to purchase the antiretroviral drugs, maintain strict cold chain logistics to keep the medication viable as it travels to rural areas, and staff clinics across the entire country.
Right.
That requires a huge percentage of the national health and social budget every single year.
It makes me think of a company that is forced to spend like 80% of its entire research and development budget just keeping its legacy servers from crashing.
That's exactly what it's like.
It is absolutely necessary. If the servers go down, the company dies. If the RT program fails, the workforce perishes. But because you were spending all your capital on bare survival, you have nothing left to invest in the future.
That is the opportunity cost. Every dollar spent maintaining the vital health baseline is a dollar that cannot be spent building new junior high schools.
Or hiring advanced STEM teachers.
Or subsidizing the transportation costs that cause students to drop out. The government is locked in a permanent war of attrition against a virus, which severely restricts its ability to invest in the structural upgrades the economy needs.
And the physical constraints aren't just limited to human health. When we look at the natural resources in the data stack, there is a hidden crisis regarding how the country uses its land and water.
It threatens to put a hard ceiling on any future growth.
Absolutely. I found this data point almost unbelievable when I first read it.
The water extraction numbers?
Yes. According to the sources, 95.9% of Eswatini's freshwater extraction is used for agriculture. Almost 96%.
It's staggering.
That leaves less than 4% for the entire industrial sector, manufacturing, and municipal living combined.
Let's put that into the context of the GDP numbers we discussed earlier.
Okay, let's do it.
Agriculture, which generates less than 10% of the national wealth, is consuming nearly 96% of the nation's water.
And meanwhile, the manufacturing sector.
Right. The manufacturing sector, which is the actual economic engine producing 35% of the GDP, is forced to operate on a tiny fraction of the remaining water supply.
It is a massive misallocation of resources. If 96% of your water is tied up in low-yield farming, the moment a drought hits, like in 2015, the entire system just fractures.
It also explains why the manufacturing sector cannot easily diversify or expand.
What do you mean?
Well, imagine a global technology firm wanted to build a modern semiconductor plant or an advanced data center in Eswatini.
Okay.
Those facilities require millions of gallons of water for cooling and processing. They physically couldn't do it. The water is already claimed by the agricultural sector.
This brings up a really fascinating metric hidden deep in the World Bank data. Because if you just look at standard GDP, you don't see this water crisis.
Right. Standard GDP just measures gross economic activity.
Exactly. If I pump an aquifer dry to grow watermelons, my GDP goes up, even though I just destroyed my country's future water supply.
That is why economists look at a metric called adjusted net savings, or ANS.
I found this part so interesting. Explain ANS for us.
GDP measures activity, but ANS measures the actual sustainable wealth accumulation of a nation. The formula for adjusted net savings starts with a country's gross national savings.
Okay, the baseline savings.
Then it adds education expenditure, because investing in human capital like literacy is considered a true addition to future wealth.
But then it subtracts the hidden costs.
Correct. It subtracts the value of natural resource depletion like over-extracting water, depleting soil, or cutting down forests.
And pollution.
Yes. It also subtracts the cost of pollution, specifically particulate matter emission damage, which harms human health and reduces productivity.
So it is basically the country's true balance sheet. And the red flag in Eswatini's data is just glaring.
It really is.
Around the year 2020, Eswatini's adjusted net savings dropped into negative territory, hitting negative 6.0%.
When a country's ANS hits negative 6%, it means that any official GDP growth is largely illusionary.
Illusionary growth.
The country is temporarily boosting its gross domestic product by liquidating its natural capital. They are pumping their irreplaceable groundwater into highly volatile agriculture and polluting their environment at a rate that exceeds their savings and educational investments.
It is the equivalent of a homeowner selling the copper wiring out of their own walls to pay the monthly mortgage.
That's a brutal analogy, but accurate.
Right. Yes, you have cash in your hand today, and your personal GDP looks fine for the month, but your house is fundamentally degrading. Over time, you are actively becoming poorer.
And this structural gridlock, the water imbalance, the education funnel, the illusionary growth, it inevitably leads us to examine the institutions managing the country.
How are the regulatory bodies handling these overlapping crises?
Well, looking at the World Bank governance indicators and, keeping strictly to what the data shows, the trends are deeply concerning.
Let's look at the numbers.
The indicators track various dimensions of governance over time. One critical metric is regulatory quality, which measures the ability of the government to formulate and implement sound policies that promote private sector development.
And where does Eswatini rank?
Historically, Eswatini sat around the 47th percentile globally, but the recent data shows a steep slide down to the 24th percentile.
Wow. What does a drop from the 47th to the 24th percentile actually look like on the ground for a business?
It manifests as unpredictability. It means business permits take longer to secure and are subject to arbitrary changes.
Oh, I see.
It means import and export tariffs might fluctuate without warning, making long-term supply chain planning completely impossible. It means the legal frameworks protecting physical property and enforcing contracts become less reliable.
And concurrently, the indicator for voice and accountability, which measures the extent to which citizens can participate in selecting their government as well as freedom of expression, remains chronically low. It hovers between 12 and 16%.
When you combine low voice and accountability with degrading regulatory quality, you create an environment that is highly toxic to foreign direct investment.
Because global capital hates uncertainty above all else.
Above all else, if a foreign manufacturer is evaluating Southern Africa for a new factory, they will look at that 24th percentile regulatory quality, they will see the water allocation crisis, and they will simply route their investment to a neighboring country with a more predictable business climate.
But wait, if foreign direct investment isn't flowing in to build new factories, how is the country keeping the lights on? How are they funding that massive 90% RD health program and the primary school systems?
The balance of payments data shows a heavy reliance on two external lifelines. The first is official development assistance, or ODA.
Foreign aid.
Yes, foreign aid coming from international donors like the US, the EU, and the UK. The second lifeline is remittances.
Money sent back home by Swazi citizens who have left the country to work abroad.
Exactly, predominantly in South Africa. Remittances consistently make up 1 to 2% of the entire GDP.
This looks like a classic dependency syndrome.
It is.
The country relies on foreign charity and the exported labor of its own citizens just to maintain baseline survival.
And while their external debt servicing currently looks manageable, I mean, they are only spending about 2 to 3% of their export earnings on servicing debt, their underlying financial defenses are terrifyingly thin.
How thin are we talking?
We can see this by looking at their foreign exchange reserves.
For you listening, foreign exchange reserves are the National Emergency Savings Account. It is the hard currency the central bank holds to pay for vital imports like fuel, medicine, and food if a global shock hits and export revenues dry up.
Right. And a healthy, stable, developing economy generally aims to hold at least 3 to 4 months' worth of import coverage in their reserves.
What's the historical average for Eswatini?
Historically, Eswatini maintained about 4.8 months of coverage, which is solid, but the recent data shows those reserves have plummeted to a highly risky 1.2 months.
1.2 months of coverage. That means if another severe drought hits, or if a global supply chain crisis temporarily shuts down their manufacturing exports, the central bank only has roughly 36 days of hard cash on hand to import essential goods.
It is walking a tightrope without a net.
That is genuinely scary.
It underscores the double-edged nature of their reliance on official development assistance. The foreign aid is absolutely vital as keeping the RT clinics open and people alive.
Right.
But because the internal regulatory environment is poor, that foreign money only enters as relief aid rather than as compounding business investment. It masks the fact that the internal engine of capital generation is completely stalled.
So if the regulatory environment is actively deterring private investment, doesn't pouring international aid into the system just act as life support? It keeps the patient breathing, but it prevents the necessary, painful structural surgeries required to actually cure the disease.
Development economists often point to this exact dynamic. When basic services are underwritten by external donors, internal institutions face far less immediate pressure to reform their regulatory quality or fix the resource misallocations.
Man, we have mapped out an incredibly complex trap here.
Not for sure.
We have a highly illiterate youth population bleeding out of the education funnel. We have 96% of the water drained by a volatile agricultural sector that produces less than 10% of the GDP. We have the fiscal weight of a health crisis, degrading regulatory quality and vanishing foreign reserves.
It's a lot of red flags.
But the purpose of exploring this data isn't just to catalog the problems, it's to find the path forward. How does a country with a 99.7% youth literacy rate break this gridlock?
Well, there is a clear glimmer of potential in the infrastructure data regarding digitalization.
Oh, tell me about that.
Over the past decade, mobile cellular subscriptions in Eswatini have surged. A vast majority of this highly literate youth population is now connected to mobile networks.
You have a generation that can read, write, and access the sum of human knowledge on a smartphone. The kinetic energy there is massive.
It is massive, but it is currently bottlenecked. The macro data shows that while mobile access is high, the number of secure internet servers remains incredibly low.
So they have phones, but no real local digital infrastructure.
Exactly. Furthermore, the export of information and communication technology services, ICT exports, has seen years of zero growth.
Zero.
Zero. They are completely stagnant compared to neighboring countries that are rapidly digitizing their service economies.
So they are consuming digital content, but they lack the infrastructure and the advanced skills to produce and export digital services.
Synthesizing everything we have analyzed, turning this demographic potential into an actual economic engine, requires action across three interconnected pillars. It requires a systemic reset.
Okay, let's go through the pillars. What's the first one?
The first pillar is fixing the education funnel.
You have to double or triple that 34% junior high completion rate.
Exactly. The government must find a way to transition that phenomenal baseline of basic literacy into high-level, marketable skills. You cannot export ICT services, and you cannot build a digital economy without a workforce that has finished secondary education and acquired technical training in STEM fields.
Which leads to the second pillar, upgrading industry and reallocating resources.
Eswatini must shift its freshwater reliance away from low-yield, highly vulnerable agriculture. You simply cannot spend 96% of your water on 10% of your GDP.
So how do they fix that?
They need to implement aggressive, drought-resistant farming techniques and highly efficient drip irrigation. By doing so, they can free up the water and capital necessary to push their 35% manufacturing base into the mid to high tech space.
Moving up the value chain.
Right. They need to attract factories that process data or build electronics, not just basic textiles.
But they can't attract those advanced factories without the third pillar, repairing governance.
Spot on. They have to reverse the slide in regulatory quality. Moving from the 24th percentile back up the ladder requires transparent, predictable, and accountable institutions.
Because if the permitting process is clear and property rights are secure,
then real foreign direct investment will return, reducing their reliance on development aid.
it is a perfectly locked puzzle. You can't build high-tech manufacturing if all your water is tied up in farming. You can't attract foreign tech companies if your regulatory environment is hostile and unpredictable, and you can't staff those tech companies if your youth are forced out of school in the 8th grade.
Solving it requires an alignment of policy that tackles human capital retention, natural resource allocation, and institutional integrity, all at the exact same time.
As we tie this all together, it is striking how this data changes the narrative around economic development. Eswatini absolutely does not lack intelligent, capable people.
Not at all.
The raw human intelligence and potential, represented by that 99.7% youth literacy rate, is staggering. What the nation lacks is the stable structural soil required to retain that talent and translate it into enduring wealth.
Potential without pathways is just friction. The human capital is there, but the plumbing is broken.
If you are running a business, managing a team, or working in local government, you have likely seen a micro version of this dynamic. You can hire the absolute best raw talent. You can have the smartest people in the room. But if your internal systems, your regulatory environment, your resource allocation, your retention funnels are broken, all that brilliant potential simply leaks out. It cannot compound.
There is one final thought to ponder as we close out this analysis.
What's that?
When an entire generation grows up with nearly universal literacy and a smartphone connecting them to the global flow of information, but they look around their physical world and find an economy that has no room for them to advance past junior high, no water for new industries, and shrinking real wealth. What happens to all that pent-up intellectual energy?
That's a profound question.
History demonstrates that it rarely just dissipates. It accumulates pressure until it forces the structure to change one way or another.
A profound dynamic to watch for in the years ahead. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the data. Keep questioning the numbers behind the narratives, keep looking for the hidden plumbing in the systems around you, and never stop learning. We'll see you on the next deep dive.